Today's tutorial is about working non-destructively. What do I mean when I say working non-destructively? Yes, it's about not damaging your original image in any way, but it's more than that. It's being able to work in a way that allows you to make changes quickly and keeps your creative options open, allowing you to try different things and explore different possibilities that you may not have thought of. Now, I've worked in the entertainment business for a long time, and one thing I found out is that there are always changes. Right up until the last minute, there are changes. If you work the way I'm going to teach you today, you will be able to make those changes quickly and easily, and maybe even make it home for dinner. Another thing that often happens in a work situation is you've been working on a particular job, you think it's finished, it's proved, it's out the door, and you're on another job, and then that first job comes back with changes. They can't take you off the current job you're on because that's also got a deadline. So somebody else is going to have to pick up your previous job and make the changes. If you work the way I'm going to teach you today, they will be able to open up your file, immediately figure out what's going on and how to make those changes. We're going to be covering a lot of material today, so the tutorial is fairly long. I've actually split it up into two parts because of that, but we won't be able to go into great detail on every tool and technique covered in this tutorial. So I've created separate tutorials for those things that I think you may want some more in-depth information on. At different times during this tutorial, I may suggest that if you want more information on this particular tool or technique, stop right now, go do that other tutorial, and then come back to this tutorial and finish this one up. Adobe Photoshop has given us many tools for working non-destructively, and we're going to be covering all of those today. It's going to be layers, layer masks, adjustment layers, layer clipping masks, and more. So when you finish this tutorial today, you're going to have a pretty solid foundation in Photoshop, plus you're going to learn a professional way of working that is going to be an advantage to you from now on. So let's get started. If you haven't already done so, please download angus.psd and go ahead and open it up in Photoshop. Next, go to Window in the top menu, Workspace, Essentials, Default, Reset Essentials. That way our screens will look the same. Now I'm going to close up some of these panels because I don't need them open and I want to have more room to work. So I'm going to click the double-headed arrows over here to collapse icons. Then I'm going to click on the layers icon and go ahead and drag that out and click the double-headed arrow to open it up. I like to keep the layers panel out, particularly for this part of the tutorial. The layers panel has a lot of features. We won't be going through all of them today, but we will cover many of the most important. If you want to learn more about the layers panel, watch my mini tutorial that is specifically about the layers panel. It'll cover all of the bells and whistles that make this panel so powerful and useful. In the introduction, I told you I would teach you a way to work that would make your life easier, and that's just what I'm about to do. But it does require you to work in a disciplined manner. I want you to develop good work habits right from the start. Be organized. When working non-destructively, you will end up with a lot of layers, and this can make navigating the layers panel a challenge. But if you work the way I'm going to teach you today, you'll be able to find everything you need just with one click. I want to start by talking about groups. When you have 60 layers or more, it is very helpful to organize these layers into groups. If you close up a group, all the layers in that group are hidden until you need them. So you can just have open the layers you're currently working on while all the others are neatly tucked away inside the appropriate group. Now I have to confess, I don't normally start out by creating groups. I tend to work in a more organic way. I do try to name my layers as I work. I think this is very important, and I'll show you why in a little bit. When I start getting a lot of layers and the panel starts getting difficult to navigate, I stop, take a few minutes to do some housekeeping, creating groups and moving the layers into the appropriate groups. However, for the purpose of this tutorial, I think it will be helpful if we start out by creating the groups first, and then as we make new layers, we will assign them to the appropriate group. This way you're going to get a very clear understanding of how to organize things in the layers panel. Okay, so what I want you to do first is to visually divide the illustration up into sections. Then you're going to create a group for each section. For example, I'm going to create a group for background, shirt, suit, and head elements. As time goes by, we're going to be adding subgroups to this group, but I want to show you how to do that later. To create a group, you can simply click the Create New Group icon at the bottom of the Layers panel. This will create a group and assign a number. If you add more groups, we just get consecutive numbers. I want you to get in the habit of naming everything. So I'm going to undo this, and I'm going to hold down the Option key as I click this icon, and this window will come up, and then you can name your group. So my first group is going to be background. I like to use uppercase when I name my groups, and then lowercase for the layers, and I'll show you why a little later. Okay, I'm going to hold down the Option key and click on this icon again, and this one I'm going to name Shirt, Suit, and Head Elements. Okay, so our plan is we're going to create a separate layer for every closed path, or nearly every closed path. So we'll have a separate layer for, say, the right shoulder and the right lapel, for the shirt, the tie, the head, the nose, the glasses, and so on. But when you're first starting out in Photoshop, making selections can be a little difficult. That's why I wanted to work with the simple line art, because we're going to be able to use the Magic Wand tool. The Magic Wand tool works by recognizing values rather than hues, so it's perfect for a black and white illustration such as this. If this were a continuous tone image or a color image, the Magic Wand would probably not be your tool of choice for making selections. In fact, I almost never use the Magic Wand. We'll look later at more sophisticated ways to make selections, but for today, for what we're doing, the Magic Wand is going to work really well. Because Photoshop is a pixel-based program, unless we have perfectly horizontal or vertical lines, we end up with a stair step. Let's zoom in and take a look at what I mean. You'll notice right along the edge, some of them are different shades of gray. That's called anti-aliasing. And anti-aliasing is a technique a lot of programs use to create the illusion of the edge being smooth when it's actually not. If we were just to click with the Magic Wand in its default tolerance of 32, we're not going to get the darkest pixels. It's going to stop right at the very dark gray, but it's not going to go right up to the black. I'm going to do a Command D to deselect that. So what I want you to do is change the tolerance. We're going to crank it up here to 150, and also make sure that you have Sample All Layers selected. Now when I make a selection, it goes all the way right up to the black, and that's going to be really important for us to have a clean illustration. The illusion of 3D is created by highlights and shadows. So you have to decide, where's your light source coming from? You also need to decide on a color scheme or a color theme. I'm going to go with very rich purples and reds and oranges, kind of a sunset theme. I think it'll make him look cool with his dark glasses. Now we're going to start adding color to our illustration. By the way, do you hear that noise in the background? That's actually rain. I'm recording this in Los Angeles, and you know the song, "It Never Rains in Southern California, It Pours"? Well, that certainly has been true over the last 2 weeks. So I apologize for the noise, but we do need the rain. I would like to begin by coloring the basic shapes of the jacket, shirt, and tie. Then we're going to use the gradients and layer clipping masks to begin to add highlights and shadows to start creating the illusion of 3D. We'll also add texture to Angus's shirt and tie using something called pattern fill layers. So highlight the suit group and open up the group by clicking on the disclosure arrow here. That way when we create a new layer, it gets added to that group. Photoshop generally gives us at least 3 ways to accomplish the same thing. In the case of layers, you could go to the drop-down menu here, New Layer. You could click the New Layer icon at the bottom of the Layers panel, or in the top menu by clicking on Layer, New Layer. Notice there is a key command listed for creating a new layer. So my suggestion is release the menu and go back and use the key command, just so you start getting used to using it. So on the Mac, that's Command-Shift-N, Control-Shift-N on the PC. So this is going to be the right shoulder. I'm going to do all lowercase and say OK. By the way, when I talk about right and left, I'm referring to your right and left and not Angus's right and left. So we have our first layer now. We need to make a selection using our magic wand. So we just click in that area and we see the marching ants that let us know that area is selected. Now we need to choose a color. Several ways we can choose color. You could click on the color panel. You could click on swatches and pick from the swatches you have. My personal favorite is to simply click on the foreground color in the tool panel, and that brings up the color picker, foreground color. So whatever I choose in here is going to modify the foreground color here in the tool panel. By default, the H radio button is selected. H stands for hue. So in this case, we have a color bar, and if we move this around, that will change the hue. And by clicking over here and moving around, we change the purity and the saturation. So I'm going to go for a kind of a purple shade and say OK. And then we have to fill the area. So you could go up here to Edit, Fill, and that will bring up this dialog box. You want to be sure to choose foreground color. By default, Content Aware is selected here. So make sure you choose foreground color. I'm going to cancel that. Notice there is a key command for that. But there's another key command which I like, which is not often listed, and that's Option Delete. And the delete key I'm speaking of is in the upper right corner of the main keyboard. So Option Delete will fill with the foreground color. All right, now let's create a new layer for the right lapel. Make the selection. I'm going to change this color just slightly and make it slightly lighter just to separate it from the shoulder. And deselect. Okay, then make a new layer, and this will be left shoulder. And we can go ahead and make another one right now for left lapel. Make sure you have left shoulder selected. Make your selection with the magic wand tool. Since this shoulder is going to be more in the shade than the right shoulder, I want it to be slightly darker and slightly cooler. I'd like to start out with the same purple I've used on the right shoulder and then modify it. So if I hit the I key, that will give me the eyedropper, and that will let me sample this color. I can then double click on it to open the color picker. I'll go slightly darker and slightly cooler. Say OK, and then fill it. Deselect. Press W to go back to your magic wand tool and select the lapel. Make sure you're on the lapel layer. Again, I'll go slightly lighter with this area to separate it from the shoulder. Okay, now we're going to do the shirt. So let's go ahead and we can close up the suit and then Command-Shift-N. I'll name this one Shirt, all lowercase. Say OK. Then I'll use the magic wand to select the right side of the shirt. And then this is one of the rare cases where I'm going to put two closed paths on a single layer. To do that, you can either click this button up here or simply hold down the Shift key, and that will select more than one closed area. Now I'm going to choose a color. I'm going with kind of a pinkish color, lavenderish. I want it to be fairly light because I'm going to be putting a pattern on top of it. So I'd say something in this range would probably work nicely. I'll say OK, and then fill that area with my color and deselect. Okay, now let's create a layer for the tie. It's going to go in the same group as the shirt, so Command-Shift-N, tie. Make a selection, choose a color. I'm going with kind of a yellow color, complement the purple suit. Fill it and deselect. Now I want to put a pattern on both the shirt and the tie. But to do that, I'm going to be using two very important features. One is a pattern fill layer, found right down here. And another is the layer clipping mask feature. So let me talk for a minute about what clipping masks are. Let's say I've got a shape above the tie here, and I just want this shape to appear only on the tie. I don't want it to be on the shirt. So there's several ways I could do this, but one of the fastest and the easiest is to use a clipping mask. So to do a clipping mask, I can simply select the layer, go up here to the drop-down menu and say Create Clipping Mask. And look at that. How quick and easy is that? And if I take the Move tool, the Selection tool, I can move this around and do all kinds of things. And it's only going to appear where it overlaps the tie. Now to release the clipping mask, you can come up here and release the clipping mask, but notice the key command. So the key command is Command-Option-G or Control-Alt-G on the PC. Notice what the clipping mask looks like in the Layers panel. The layer below is clipping the layer above or masking the layer above, and there will be an arrow pointing down to the layer that is doing the clipping. You always know you have a layer clipping mask situation when you have this kind of a stair-step arrangement in the Layers panel. That indicates there's a clipping mask. Okay, so let's add a pattern to the shirt. I'm going to hold down the Option key and then add a pattern fill layer right here. I'll call this shirt polka dots. I'm going to check Use Previous Layer to create clipping mask, and then I'll say OK. And it's filled it with this very unattractive looking texture. But I'm going to, if you click on the window here, the texture window, I can choose the polka dots. And then we can scale up the polka dots so that we can actually see them. Maybe something along that line like that. So I'm going up to about 375%. And then I'll say OK. All right, so now we've got the polka dots, but it's completely taken away the color of the shirt. So what we can do to make the shirt show through is we can change the blend mode of the polka dot layer here. Right here is where we change the blend mode. We're going to change the blend mode to multiply. When we change it to multiply, the white will disappear. All right, now let's add a pattern to the tie. Okay, let's add a pattern to the tie. Hold down the Option key and add a pattern fill layer. I'll name this one Tie Stripes and use previous layers of clipping mask. And whenever you see a gear like this, that means there's some other options here, and a lot of times that means you can add presets. So in this case, we have all these different textures we could add. I'm going to go clear down here and add the web pattern textures. Now I'm going to append it. That means it's going to add it to my existing textures, and I'll say OK. And then I'm going to check one of these and see what happens. This will give me horizontal stripes. This one would give me horizontal stripes too, but it won't be as large, as wide. I want fairly wide stripes, so I'm going to select this one, and then I'm going to use the scale here to scale it way up. I'll go up all the way as far as I can go, to 1000. And then I'll say OK. And again, I'm going to change the blend mode to multiply. Now, what if we wanted to create our own pattern? That's very easy to do. I'm going to take the rectangle shape tool, which is over here. I'm going to click and drag. So I've got red selected as my color. You can change that right up in here if you want, but I want red. I think red would be rather nice on this. So I'm going to go with the red. Now, if I hold down the Option key, you're going to get the double-headed arrows, and you can click and drag down and do it again and do it again. What I want is to get a square. I'll use the Marquee tool, hit M, and then I'm going to define, hold down the Shift key, and define an area that is a square. The Pattern tool uses tiles, so we need to have a perfect square for the tile. Now I'm going to go up to Edit, Define Pattern. I'll just call this Red Stripes. Say OK, deselect, and now I can actually get rid of all of these layers that I just created. So I'll select one and shift click on the other, and then you can drag them to the trash can, or you can hold the Command, Option, Shift, and click, and that will delete them all. All right, now I want to change this pattern, so I can just double click the pattern, click in here, and here's my red. So now I'm going to reduce the scale. Maybe something like that. And then I'll say OK. I encourage you to explore on your own. Have some fun. Check out different patterns and see what you can come up with. Okay, now we're going to start adding highlights and shadows using gradients and clipping masks. Gradients are a very powerful tool. They can get rather complicated, so I've created a separate mini tutorial just for gradients. If you're new to gradients, you might want to stop right now and go do that mini tutorial, and then come back here and you'll have a better understanding of how gradients work. All right, I'm going to start by adding gradients to the right shoulder of the suit. I told you that if you worked my way, you'd be able to get to groups and layers with just a single click. Here's how you do it. If you're already in the selection tool, you just simply right-click and all of your groups and layers will appear right below your cursor. Now, when this feature originally came out, it didn't have this stair-step situation, like in kind of an outline form. Everything lined up flush left. So it was hard to tell what was a group and what was a layer. That's when I came up with this idea of making all my groups uppercase and my layers lowercase. So that's obviously not so important now that they have distinguished it by stepping it over like this, but I still like it because it's very quickly to see, okay, this is a group and this is a layer. That opened up the suit group and took us right to the right shoulder layer. Now we can create gradients several ways. And again, I suggest you watch the gradient tutorial for more information. In this case, I'm going to use the gradient tool and create a new layer, a regular layer. Okay, so I'm going to do Command-Shift-N, and this will be right shoulder highlight. Use previous layer to create clipping mask. So here we are. This is our gradient tool over here. Now to modify the gradient tool, we have several features up here in the options panel. For one thing, we have style. I'm going to go with a linear style for this. I want to choose foreground, the second option, foreground to transparent. That's by far the most valuable of the presets. In my opinion, that should be the default preset. Current color is the foreground color in my tool panel. So I'm going to change that by double-clicking on here. I can come out here and sample the suit to start with, but then I'm going to go lighter by quite a bit for my highlight. I think for right now, I'm going to stick with the purple range and maybe add some warm tones later on. So I'm going to say OK to that. Now the way this tool works is you simply drag. So I'm going to click and drag, and there you see the highlight. Now you can undo it, Command-Z, and try it different angles, for example. Here's one of the great things about having things on different layers. So deselect the auto select. That one drives me crazy. And then use the selection tool, and you can move this around. You could change the opacity. Make it more subtle if you want. You could try different blend modes. For example, you could just go through maybe a screen. So you can see all these different results that you can get with different blend modes. I kind of like the look of the screen. So I'm going to go with screen. Now, if you're not in the selection tool, you can hold down the Control Command key, and that's Control-Alt on a PC, and you will be able to get to the different groups and layers. So I'm going to select the right lapel, and I'm going to add a new layer, right lapel highlight, and use previous layer as a clipping mask. And maybe I'll just simply use that same color for right now and try to sort of get the same angle. And there we go. That's rather nice. Kind of like that. Maybe I'll hit it again just to brighten it up a little bit more. Later we're going to talk about brushes, and we can add some extra highlights right along the edges and fine-tune this. All right, let's add a shadow while we're here. Let's add a shadow to the lapel. So I can just click on the right lapel, Command-Shift-N, and this would be right lapel, shadow, previous layer is a clipping mask, say OK. So I'll grab my gradient tool, If I hold down the Option key while I'm in the gradient tool, I will get the eyedropper, and I can sample this color. Maybe I'll go with that color and see how it looks on the edge of the lapel. So I'm going to click and drag from this side and change this blend mode to multiply. If it feels too dark, you could lower the opacity a little bit. We're going to need a shadow inside the shirt here. So I'm going to right click, or if I'm in a different tool, I'll Control Command click and go to the shirt layer. I'll add a new layer and I'll call this one Shirt Right Shadow. And of course, use previous layer as a clipping mask. Okay, and then I've got the gradient tool. I'm going to hold down the Option key to sample the pinkish color on the shirt. Open up the color picker. I'll go a little bit cooler and a little bit darker. Say OK. And then click and drag here. Again, maybe I'll try multiply on that. Kind of like that. It gives it a little bit more depth. Now I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. I could put them both on the same layer if I wanted to, but I might like the option to manipulate them and treat them a little bit differently. So I'm actually going to do a new one, and I will call this one Shirt Left Shadow. And I think I'll go a little bit darker with this one. And this, his whole body would be in shadow over here. So this would be a little bit of a longer, I think, shadow. Something like that. Change the blend mode to multiply. And when later on we're going to put a shadow under the nose and so forth to add extra depth. All right, now I'm just going to continue with the left lapel and the left shoulder, doing essentially the same thing. The left lapel highlight won't be as bright as the one on the right because it's not getting as much light. So we could make it a little bit darker. Now this one I'm going to take it sort of an angle from the bottom because I don't want it to have so much of a highlight up in here because the head would be hiding that. And I'll also show you later how to use layer masks to mask out the area. Now I'm going to add some tone to the left shoulder. So I'll right click, left shoulder. And in this case, rather than making it dark, I think I'm going to use a reflected light. I'm going to assume that there's a cool light coming from the left side of the image. So in this case, I'm going to choose sort of a cool turquoise color. See how it looks. All right, that might work. I might have to adjust that a little bit later. I think I will put a shadow under the lapel. So I will make another layer. I'll call it left shoulder lapel shadow, just so I can be very clear on that. And sample the purple and then go darker and cooler. And then I'll click and drag. Maybe down there. Might be a little bit too much. Let's see, like that. And then change the blending mode to multiply. All right, that's looking pretty good. Okay, I think I'll use the same reflected light that I used on the left shoulder on the tie. So I'm going to select the tie, add a new layer, hold down the Option key and sample that bluish color. Drag it across the tie. And then I think I'll play with the different blend modes to see what kind of results I can get. You can just drag through them and it will update. And you can see right away what's going to happen. I sort of like the pin light. I think I'm going to go with that. There's just one more thing I'd like to do before we move on to the head, and that is color in the Digital Design Ranch badge he's wearing. We'll handle that just the same way, fill it with a solid color, and then use probably 2 clipping masks to add highlights and shadows. Okay, so I'll put that in the suit group. Click on suit, Command-Shift-N. I'm going to zoom in on the badge, so I'm going to hold down the Command spacebar, zoom in, and then the spacebar will just let me move it around. W for the magic wand, Shift key to select each of the letters, and then I'll choose a color. I think I'll go with a kind of a orange color. That kind of seems to be the theme of Digital Design Ranch. Deselect, add a new layer for highlights. Use my gradient tool, and I'll switch to a lighter yellowish color and add some highlights to the side. And then I'll add another one. For the shadow side. We'll make that a darker burgundy color, I think. I'll change that one to multiply and change this one to screen. And there we go. Be sure to save your work. And now we're going to move on to the head. But one thing I just noticed is I forgot to define the base of the horns, where the horns meet the head. I'm going to have a path in there in order to use the magic wand to make a selection so that I can put the horns on separate layers. So I'm going to have to correct that right now. And I think probably the easiest way to correct that is to use the pencil tool at this point. So let's make a new layer right above our Angus layer. And I'll name this one Horns Base. Click OK. Now let's select the pencil tool right over here. When you click on the pencil, you can modify the pencil tool up in the options panel. So I'd like you to click here and change the size to 9 pixels. And then let's zoom in with the Command spacebar shortcut. Now make a quick curve stroke. And the faster you do it, probably the smoother it's going to be. I'm going to move over to the other side by using the spacebar. And same thing, I'm going to just, whoops, that one's going to be too big, Command Z. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, I think that will be fine. Now let's go on up to the Heads Elements group. Make sure it's open and add a new layer. And this layer I'm just going to call Head and say OK. I'll take my magic wand, W, and click, Shift click, and get all the head in here. Now for the color, I think I'm going to go with a warm gray. Now let's go on up to the Heads Elements. Make sure that you have the disclosure arrow pointing down, so when we make a new layer, it goes into that group. And then Command-Shift-N, and I'll call this Head. I'll take my magic wand, W, click, Shift click. I'm going to use a light gray, something like that, and fill it. And then deselect. I'm going to put the ridge of the nose on a separate layer, even though right now I'm going to make it the same color. Let's also, while we're at it, go ahead and do the ears. I'm going to put each of the ears on its own layer. So Command-Shift-N, and we'll do right ear outside, because we'll do the inside of the ears on separate layers. I'll just fill it with the same color I'm using for the head at the moment. and then another layer, and this will be left ear outside. I think I'll go ahead and make this one a little bit darker since it is on the shadow side of the head. Deselect. All right, now let's start adding some highlights and shadows using clipping masks and gradients. I'll start with the head layer, make a new layer on top of that one, and this will be head highlight. Use the previous layer as a clipping mask, and I'm going to go with a very light gray. Now we're probably going to modify these colors once we get the background in, but for right now I'll just go with the light gray. I may want that even lighter, so I'm going to do it again and go almost to white. All right. Then I'll do a new layer, and this will be head shadow. I'll go to a darker gray, and I think I want it to be in a little bit in the purple range, sort of to pick up the color of the jacket, just kind of keeping the same color range there. Whoops, I forgot to do a layer clipping mask. So the key command is Command Option G, and there, fix that. Let's go ahead and change that blending mode to multiply. I think I'll add another layer that will be the head reflected light. Go back to my gradient and put a little bit of this blue along this edge here. Let's do the highlight on the ears. Since I'm not currently in the selection tool, I'm going to press the Control Command keys and click to access the right ear outside layer very quickly. I'm going to put a new layer above that one, and this will be right ear outside highlight. And make it a clipping mask. Since I'm in the gradient tool already, I can hold down the Option key and sample this lighter color on the head, and then add that to this layer. And we'll do some shadow. Go darker. And put that inside here. And change that blending mode to multiply. All right, let's do the other ear. I'm going to start with the shadow. So this will be left ear, shadow. And I'll make it a little bit darker. Change the blending mode to multiply. Okay. Now maybe for the outside of this one, we'll pick up some of the blue. Like that. Save your work. Let's do the dark glasses. And magic wand tool. I'll go with a very dark gray on this. Deselect. I do want to add some highlights and shadows on this, so I'm going to, and this will be glasses, highlight. Use a lighter gray, maybe in the pinkish tones. And then a darker gray on the other side. Okay, let's do the inside of the ears. Let's move on down to the right ear outside, and I'll make a new layer above this group of layers. It will not be clipped to the others, but it will be right ear inside. I'll use my magic wand to make a selection and then fill it with a light pink color. Deselect. Then I'll move up above the left ear outside, make a new layer. This will be left ear inside. Make a selection. Since it's on the shadow side, I'll go a little bit darker with the pink and say okay. All right, let's add some tone to these. So the right ear outside, I'm going to add a new layer. And this one will be clipped, and this will be right ear inside, shadow, and I will use a clipping mask. Okay, so we'll go to a darker pink. Gradient tool. Okay, then I'm going to go over to the other side. Make it a little bit darker. I'll try blending mode of multiply on this one, see how that looks. Okay. I'd like to pick up some of the purple in the bottom of this ear, I think. So I'll do this one as left ear inside, and I'll just call it purple. I kind of like that. I'm going to put some of that on the other side as well. Previously, I told you that I would show you how to take layers that have already been made and put them into groups. So that's really easy in Photoshop. So for example, let's take everything that's related to the head and put that into a group. Maybe I'll put the ears into a separate group and the glasses into another group. So I'm going to select the head and hold down the Shift key. We've got the head, we've got the ridge of the nose. So those I will put inside a single group. And so you just select those and then press Command G. You can double click it and rename it. I'll call it face. And then I'm going to do the ears. I have quite a few layers for the ears. Command G. Let's double click it. Ears. And then I'm going to take glasses. Command G. Glasses. Okay, now I'd still like to do the nose and the horns and the reflection in the glasses, and then we'll start on the background. After the background's done, we're probably going to want to modify the character, bringing in some of the color from the background, adding highlights and shadows using brushes, modifying the shadows, and using layer masks to refine the shadows and highlights. So I think I'll put the nose inside the face. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the face, nose. Select the magic wand, click the nose. I think I'll go with a pinkish color for the nose. Maybe I'll select it from the ears. So hit I, and maybe a little bit lighter would be good. And then fill it and deselect. Let's add a couple layers of highlights and shadows. I will definitely come back later and add some more detail with brushes on the nose. Choose the gradient tool. Now just click and drag on this side, put a little bit of highlight on the nose here. Maybe I want that stronger, so I'll try a screen or dodge. I guess that's fine. And now I'll do another one. This will be nose shadow. Select the pink and then go darker. Select one of these darker colors here. That way it all kind of ties together. All right, that looks pretty good. Maybe I'll do another one across the bottom there. All right, not bad. We're also going to come in and do a shadow underneath the nose on the shirt and on the jacket to give it a little more depth. Okay, let's do the horns. So Command-Shift-N, we'll do the horns separately. I'll make these kind of a warm light gray because I do want to have some tone in there, so when I add the highlights and shadows, they will be seen. Make a new one. Left horn. Select it. And I'll go ahead and fill it with the same tone. Now let's add our highlights and shadows. So this would be the right horn highlight. I'll go to a white. And by the way, if you want to get to pure white and black in your Tools panel, hit D, think of D for default, and then toggle with the X key. The X key toggles between foreground and background color. It switches places between the foreground and background color. So I'm going to go with white. Select the gradient tool and just hit some edge here with white. And do another one for the shadow. I'll just sample this darker color over here and see how this goes. Not bad. And then I'll come in with the brushes and more carefully highlight and shade the horn. Okay, I'm going to go up to this horn. Go to white. I think I want it just up here at the top. All right, I think that'll work. And then left horn. Shadow. I'll sample one of these grays over here and pull that up. Maybe a little bit in here. Looks a little more dimensional. Okay, save it. Let's add some reflection to the glasses. We may want to change this color later after we get the background in and see how it looks. But for right now, I'm just going to fill it with a very light sort of lavender color. I'm going to put this in the glasses group. And this will be, I'll call it glasses, right reflection. And make a selection. And fill it with a very light lavender color. Something like this. And then we'll do the other one. For now, I'm just going to make them both the same color. Okay, so we've got all the main areas filled in. And it's about time to start working on the background. But first, I want to take the illustration, the original illustration of Angus, and move it up to the top. And I'll explain why in just a second here. But first, we have to merge these two layers together, the horns base that we added and Angus. So we'd select them both and then press Command E. I'm going to rename this by double-clicking on it. I'll name it Angus. I'll move Angus on up to the top here. Now at first, because it is a solid layer, it's going to hide everything else. But there's a little trick I want to show you. When you've got line art such as this in pure black and white, if you change the blend mode to multiply, what happens is the white disappears. It becomes completely transparent. Now why do this? Well, because we have those anti-aliasing gray pixels, which now merge with the image below and create a very clean line. All right, next we're going to get started on the background.